Okay, hi. This is Achaean Greece IV, the one on Greek philosophy. Um, I'm going to subject you to Greek philosophy, or at least a little taste of what they were doing in Greek philosophy, um, because that's what my PhD is in, philosophy. Um, so I am going to make you sit through this. It's okay. Hopefully you'll like it. Anyway, okie dokie. I mentioned in the last video well, not in the last video because the Greek art video comes before this, but in Achaean Greece 2, I mentioned the remarkable period of cultural production that went on during the latter Achaean period, or the part of the Achaean period that we call the Golden Age of Athens, 450 to 400 or thereabouts. Um, and one of the really big deal things that happened then was the development of philosophy as we understand it today. Um, Philosophy is fundamental to every field of thought, even science. I'll explain that one when in a little bit. Uh, but a lot of people don't really understand that because they don't really understand what philosophy is. Um, of all the subjects that you take in college, you take history, you take math, you take English, you take science classes. You do all of those in high school so that when you get to college, you know what to expect. History class is going to be like history class in high school, but more. Science class is going to be like science class from high school, but more. Same with English, same with math, etc. Philosophy, though, is one of those subjects that most people don't encounter until they get to college. And so it is a subject that a lot of people come into school into college without much of an understanding of what it is. Um, so, uh, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you a little bit of what philosophy is, and then explain a little bit of how it got going in the Golden Age of Athens in the latter part of the 5th century BCE, and then I'm going to give you a little taste of philosophy, maybe a little taste of Plato, but I'm certainly going to talk about the trial of Socrates. So that's what we're doing. So let me show you the little thing. That's what we're doing. We're gonna do what is philosophy. We're gonna do who are the philosophers. Maybe a little taste of Plato, and we're definitely gonna do trial of Socrates. Little taste of Plato as a treat, right? That was what Morgan said. I can't take credit. Okay. So what is philosophy? Philosophy is a subject that a lot of people mistake for talking about their feelings. Um, they There's this idea that your philosophy is just sort of your take on the world. What's your philosophy? People might ask, and they just want to hear some trite little saying like, "Well, take one day at a time." That's my philosophy. Um, or try to always eat what's on your plate. That's my philosophy. I don't know. I'm not good at that. That's not what we mean by philosophy in the academic sense. Um, the word philosophy is a Greek word from philos, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. So literally, it translates into the love of wisdom. I hate that. I don't think it's useful. Saying that philosophy is the love of wisdom doesn't really tell you anything. What do you do in philosophy if it's the love of wisdom? Do you write love notes to wisdom? I don't know. That doesn't help me any. So, what is philosophy? Well, philosophy is uh, essentially it is the rational exploration of the world. Um, it is an attempt to answer questions that we have about the world. Stop that. Stop that. There we go. Philosophy is the rational explanation of the world, an attempt to answer the non empirical questions uh, about the world that we care about. Now, this raises immediately the question of what empirical means. What is empirical? You may have heard the phrase empirical evidence. The word empirical just means measurable or quantifiable. So when we think about things that we can measure, like we might think about uh, what is the pH level of Lake Thunderbird, right? What is the acidity level of Lake Thunderbird? Well, you can answer that question by going out and taking measurements. You can take water samples and you can use a little litmus strip and you can measure the pH level, the acidity level of the lake. Um, you can arrive at an answer by measuring, by quantifying. But there are questions that we care about that have answers, or the way to answer them, rather, is not, you can't measure anything to answer those questions. Um, like, am I a good person? Am I a good person? I can't take a blood test and figure that out. I can't whip out the goodometer, right? I can't go, ooh, 83, I'm a good person. It doesn't work like that. Um, there's no measurement to be taken for that kind of question. Am I a good person? What is the purpose of life? What is the nature of friendship? What is the best form of government? These are questions that you don't measure anything to get answers to. These are non empirical questions. But just because they're non empirical doesn't mean that we don't care about them. We care very much about these kinds of questions. Do I have free will? Um, what is the nature of the human soul, if indeed it exists at all? Um, these are questions that you can't, they're non empirical. Um, there's nothing that can be measured or quantified to answer these questions, which makes them philosophical questions. Um, that's what a philosophical question is. And so philosophy is an attempt to explore the world and answer the non empirical questions in the world. That is what philosophy is. Um, Now, when we say it's the rational exploration of the world, that sounds a lot like science, just being rational. But the difference, of course, is that science answers empirical questions and philosophy answers the non empirical questions. Now, back in the days of the Greeks, science and philosophy were all part of the same pursuit because they didn't have the capacity to quantify and measure that we have now. So a lot of what we would now call science was just classified under natural philosophy, they would have called it. Whereas other stuff like what is the purpose of life, or am I a good person, or what is the nature of friendship, would have been classified under what they would have called moral philosophy. But anyway, So philosophy is the attempt to answer the non-empirical questions of life and to uh, try to understand the world that we live in. Okay, so how does one go about answering a non-empirical question? Well, the only way to answer a non-empirical question is to make an argument for it. Now, an argument, as you all know, is where you try to yell louder than the other person. No, that is not correct. Um, an argument, in the technical sense, is a series of premises or statements that support a conclusion. In other words, um, if I said, you are a bad person because you did not pick me up at 7 when you promised you would. That is a conclusion. And my argument to support it is, you promised you would pick me up at 7, premise 1. Promises should be kept, premise 2. Only a bad person breaks promises, premise 3. You broke your promise, premise 4. Conclusion, therefore, you're a bad person. You're a bad person because you didn't pick me up. That's an argument I made. Now, you may disagree with the argument. But doing so requires critiquing the argument. You can't just put your foot down and say no, and still be rational. Um, to be a rational person, you have to have reasons for the things that you do and believe. So if you think I'm wrong in my argument, you have to say that one of my premises is wrong, or you have to show how my argument is a bad one. You can't just say, well, I disagree. That's not being rational. That's just being contrary. To be a rational person, you have to answer or rebut my premises to show why the argument is a bad one. So in philosophy, to answer these non-empirical questions, we make arguments. We offer premises to support our conclusions about questions like what makes a person a good person, or what is the nature of friendship, or do we have free will? Um, and you may be wondering, what kind of premises can you offer that aren't empirical? But I just gave you an example of an argument that wasn't empirical at all. Um, a little bit of empiricalness was invoked when I said you didn't pick me up. That's a fact, an empirical fact about the world. Um, But the major premises, the ones that matter, like promises should be kept, that's not empirical. That's just something that I'm trying to convince you of. I'm trying to convince you that promises should be kept. And if you want to say, well, why should promises be kept? I've got more arguments that support that as a conclusion. Um, and they're not empirical either. They're just philosophical arguments. Um, So philosophy is this attempt to rationally explore the world and answer non-empirical questions using the method of argument. By making arguments for our conclusions, we want to offer answers to these non-empirical questions, and we make arguments to support those answers. And what's really interesting about this is that two things about it. First of all, obviously, because we're dealing with non-empirical questions and we're just dealing with arguments, the best we can say about any answer in philosophy is, I have a good argument. We don't know if we're right. Right? Promises should be kept. Well, I think that's true. I think that's a true thing. And I think there are good arguments to show that it's true. But in the grand cosmic scheme of things, there may be no fact of the matter. Like there's nothing out there in the universe, inscribed on a tablet somewhere that says promises should be kept. Right? There's no objective fact of the matter about whether promises should be kept. There's just good arguments. Um, so there's in philosophy, there's not necessarily right or wrong answers so much as there's just better or worse answers. Um, if you take my meaning there. I'll check with Morgan to see if that makes sense. Morgan says yes. So all of you who think it doesn't are wrong. No, I'm kidding. Um, there are no there are no right or wrong answers as such. There are just better or worse answers. There are better and worse arguments. Um, what should promises are promises the kind of things that should be kept? I have a good argument. That's what I can say. I think there's a good argument that promises should be kept. I can't say objectively it's true that promises should be kept. That is a misunderstanding of what objective truth can indicate. It's not an empirical question. It's not a question of objective truth. It's a question of whether there's a good argument, and that's it. Um, so there you go. Um, so Glossy is a rational attempt to explore the world. That is rational in the sense of having reasons. It's a rational attempt to explore the world and answer these non-empirical questions by the method of argument, that is, giving reasons. And it is just a matter of making good arguments. So, philosophy, a philosophical worldview, which is, say, a way of looking at the world rationally and thinking that the non empirical questions of the world have answers uh, in the sense of being good answers, in the sense that there are good arguments for them. The philosophical worldview is distinct from the mythological worldview that I uh, mentioned in a previous video. The mythological worldview says that the world operates in a personal fashion on the logic of narrative, um, whereas the philosophical worldview says that no, there are better and worse answers to things, and they're not dependent on personal viewpoints. Right? It's not just about um, they're not personal answers. They are answers that are we can make an argument for or against this, and it's not a question. It's a good argument even if you don't like it. Let's say that. I think promises should be kept, and I think I have a good argument for it, and I think the argument is good, even if it makes you mad, even if it uh, doesn't figure into your hopes and dreams. Um, Even if you don't like keeping promises, that doesn't mean that there's a bad argument. It means that you are being irrational um, because you are not acknowledging uh, the the validity of the argument that's being offered. Okay, so that's what is glossary. I've got a lengthier video on that. What is glossary that happens in my intro to philosophy course, but that's a different course. And if you want to learn more about philosophy, you can take that. But so let me give you a little taste of philosophy. Um, in the sense of what were some examples of philosophical discussions that were going on in classical Greece in this period of the Golden Age of Athens. Okay, so there was a philosopher named Plato. Um, Plato was one of the major philosophers that we still talk about today, and he has a little type of modeling clay named after him. No, I'm kidding. That's different. That's Play-Doh. Plato with a T, Plato, Plato. Plato was a philosopher, um, and he was very much concerned with questions like what makes a person a good person. And he pondered this for a long time. He wrote a bunch of stuff about it. Um, and he came to the conclusion that being a good person is distinct from being a successful person. That moral goodness is not the same thing as being rich. It's not the same thing as being famous or even healthy or things like that. Because you can be a morally good person even if you're sick or old or if you are poor or things like that. Um, and so he concluded that moral goodness cannot be a property of the body. It can't be something that has to do with your body. It has to do with what we would call the mind and what he called um, uh, uh, the nous or I guess it's something halfway between the mind and the soul um, in the Greek parlance. That there's this part of you inside, the thinking, feeling part of you, that is better or worse, that is good or bad. And it is independent of the physical part of you. Um, and he thought that the standard for whether it was good or bad had to do with, he thought the concept of things, like the concept of goodness, or the concept of chair, or the concept of tacos, he thought that these concepts really existed in this place called the realm of forms, the realm of concepts. That all the concepts that exist are up there somewhere. And that's how we have them in our brains. That they're up there in the realm of forms and they exist there. And that's the only reason that we can understand concepts, is that they really exist somewhere as independent things. Now that sounds nutty, but let me tie it together here with his concept, his idea of what it means to be a good person. He thought that your nous, your soul, if you will, can resemble goodness, can resemble the concept of goodness or not. In other words, it can be good or bad. It can be closer to the concept of goodness or further away from the concept of goodness. And he thought that the soul comes from the realm of forms, that there's this perfect realm of forms where everything, the perfect concepts of everything exist, and that your soul is there. And when you're born, your soul comes into your body, and that being good is just a matter of doing good things so that your soul will be shaped into a form that resembles the form of goodness. And when you die, your nous, your soul, goes back to the realm of forms. Well, if that sounds familiar, bear in mind that all of this is happening hundreds of years, 400 or 500 years before Christianity ever existed. Um, this is influential. Plato's ideas on the soul and what it means to be a good person are going to be very influential on the development of early Christianity. The early writers in Christianity were educated in Greek philosophy, and they knew about Plato and his ideas on the soul. So this is, now, it doesn't mean that Plato is right about everything. Not many people believe nowadays that there is a realm of concepts. Um, but a lot of Christians believe there's something similar to it, and they believe the soul comes from that place and goes back to that place, and they believe that being good means care of the soul and not care of the body. Um, so, you know, maybe it's not like a completely bonkers idea. Um, like I said, I go into more detail on these things in my intro philosophy class. But anyway, that's just a little taste of Greek philosophy there. And if you're interested in more philosophy, you can take my intro to philosophy class. Um, so anyway, so who were the people who were doing all of this? Uh, who were the philosophers? The philosophers were, in one sense, the philosophers, there was a certain group of people who did philosophy kind of full time. Of those people, let me go back to this. Of those people, Socrates was kind of the first one to really do it the way we do it now. He kind of created Western philosophy as we know it. And he was the teacher of Plato, who was the teacher of Aristotle. And there were plenty of other philosophers, but those were sort of like the big three that are still influential today. Um, but there were a lot of philosophers. There were philosophers who were trying to find these answers to questions. But there were a lot of people who came and studied with them who were just interested in trying to understand their universe in a way that didn't involve gods and myths. They wanted to understand why things happened and what the answers were in a way that did not involve mythology and stories about gods. They wanted reasons, they wanted arguments um, uh, to support their beliefs about the world rather than just a nice sounding story. So the philosophers, in one sense, some philosophers were professionals who did this in their capacity. This is sort of what they did. But in another sense, anyone who wondered about these things is a philosopher. And that's still true today. If you've ever wondered, am I a good person? What does it mean to be a good person? Am I a good friend? What does it mean to be a good friend? What is the point of life? If you've wondered about these things and you've ever thought about them outside of the context of religion, you're doing philosophy. You're asking philosophical questions. And you may not be a professional philosopher. That's what I do. I am professionally a philosopher. That's my job. Um, I write and think about philosophy a lot. And I write papers and I go to conferences and I get things published. And um, philosophy, I may be a professional philosopher, but what I'm doing is not different in its fundamental form from the things that you do. If you lie awake at night wondering about these questions, you're doing philosophy just like I am. I'm better at it probably because I've had training and practice. But that's just like saying that an Olympic swimmer is a better swimmer than you are. It doesn't mean that you don't swim. I'm sure you do. It just means that because of all the training and practice that Olympic swimmer has had, they're super, super good at it. And maybe they can give you some pointers on how to do it better. But you're not doing anything fundamentally different. So, who are the philosophers? Well, kind of in one sense, they're a small group of people who ask these questions and dwell on them professionally. But in another sense, who are the philosophers? The answer is just everybody. Asking philosophical questions is just part of what makes us human. Um, because I don't know how human I would be if I didn't ask questions like, am I a good person? Am I a good friend? These are things that just part of the human condition. If you haven't lain awake at night wondering about these things, wait. You will at some point in your life. Um, Sorry. If you haven't wondered what is the point of life, you're gonna. You're just young. Um, so anyway. So the last thing I want to talk about is the trial of Socrates. I want to give you a little bit of history here that poses a philosophical question. The trial of Socrates. Okay. So Socrates, I mentioned earlier, Socrates is kind of considered the founder of Western philosophy. He was the guy who sort of set the pattern for how we do philosophy even now, even 2,500 years later. Um, and he did this by asking questions. He asked the hard questions, and he asked them of people. If someone says, "Oh, I really love I love my stuffed Scorpio doll," if I said I love my stuffed Scorpio doll, Socrates might go, "Well, what do you mean by the word love? Is it the same as loving a person?" I would say, "Well, no." He would say, "Okay, so there's at least two kinds of love. How is this kind of love different from loving a person?" And I would say, "Okay, well, I guess." Anyway, that's called the Socratic method. The Socratic method is to ask questions to interrogate our concepts and try to lay out what we mean by various words and ideas until we can answer these important non-empirical questions like, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Sorry. Like, what is love? I want you all to respect the fact that I'm fighting the urge to say it again. Anyway. Um, Baby, don't hurt me. Morgan singing I Want to Know What Love Is. You're too young to remember that song, but that's okay. Um, we're old. We don't mind. We've earned it. We've earned a right to be old and crabby. Um, and we exercise that right frequently. Anyway, but anyway, the Socratic method, as it is called after Socrates, is the method of asking these questions. Socrates had a lot of students, people who came to him and wanted to learn from him because he was developing this new way of getting at answers to the big questions, the big philosophical questions. And that was exciting to a lot of people. Um, but it was also very challenging to a lot of people. Um, Socrates eventually annoyed enough important people by asking hard questions of powerful and influential people. He eventually annoyed enough people that they put him on trial for impiety, which is, say, questioning the existence of the gods, which he didn't do. He just questioned the nature of the gods. um, so it's a fine hair to split, but still. Um, uh, for questioning the existence of the gods and corrupting the youth by teaching them how to ask hard questions. So, a trial in classical Athens, in democratic Athens, a trial took place where there was no public prosecutor. Someone had to bring charges against you, and they would lay out the case against you. And then there was no lawyer to defend you. You would have to make a speech to defend yourself. And the jury would be a couple of hundred people who were citizens who were selected at random, much like juries are today. And they would vote on whether you were guilty or not based on listening to the person bringing the charges and then listening to your defense. And there's a trick to this, but I'll get to that in a moment. So the prosecutor lays out the case against Socrates. And by the way, all of this is recorded historically. It's recorded in a couple of places, but most famously it is recorded in a document called The Trial of Socrates that was written by Socrates' most famous student, Plato. So Plato wrote an account of the trial of his teacher, Socrates. So anyway, so we know how it all went down from that document and some of the other documents that exist. But anyway, so Socrates defends himself, but the main thing that he does to defend himself is not to argue that the charges aren't true. Although he does do that too. The main thing he does to defend himself is that he argues that what he's doing is valuable. That trying to answer these big questions is important. That it's a service that he's providing to the city by trying to, get at the answers to the hard questions. Now, this was not sufficiently convincing to the jury, but I'm going to tell you why here in a second. So, Athenian trial practice had a kind of weird version of plea bargaining that's very different from how we do it today. If you've ever watched Law and Order or anything like that, hopefully you only know it from television and not from personal experience. If you've ever watched Law and Order or some kind of legal show, you know that what will happen is before a case goes to trial, prosecutors will often offer someone on trial a plea bargain. They'll say, if you agree to say that you're guilty and explain your guilt to the court, we'll lower some of the charges. We'll only charge you with this. Like, instead of charging you with murder one, we'll just charge you with manslaughter, but you don't get to contest it. You don't get to say, oh, well, I'm not guilty. You have to say, yes, I'm guilty, and you have to explain your guilt to the court. It's called a plea bargain. Okay. You make a plea to the court, and you get a bargain out of it. Okay, so in Athens, they did it a little different. The way that it worked then was that if you were on trial and you were voted guilty, they would hand down a sentence to you, like pay a fine or something, and then you got to, if you wanted to, you got to say what you think you deserved instead. So this would be like going through a trial for murder, being found guilty, and then you say to the court, okay, but I think I only deserve to be convicted of manslaughter. Now, notice something crucial about that. In the process of saying what you think you deserve, you are admitting guilt. That's literally a part of the process. I deserve to be punished in this way. I did something wrong and I deserve to be punished in this way. Like, here's your fine of 10,000 whatever. And you say, oh, I think I only deserve to pay 5,000. But in the saying, I deserve to pay 5,000, in trying to rebut the sentence, you are literally saying, I did do something wrong enough that I deserve to pay 5,000. Okay. So, this caused a weird sort of trend in Athenian court in practice, and what happened. Because what happened is, if you were voted guilty, oftentimes what would occur is the jury would impose the harshest sentence they could think of in an effort to get you to admit guilt and offer a lesser punishment. You see how that works? They would say something like, we sentence you to death. And you're like, whoa, 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 I don't deserve death. But if you can't get them to agree to your counteroffer, you're going to be killed. In other words, you give them a counteroffer and they vote on it, and if you don't agree, or if they don't agree to your counteroffer, the original sentence takes effect. So they will offer a really awful, harsh sentence, and they're hoping that you'll give a counteroffer that admits guilt. Like, oh, whoa, I don't deserve death. I deserve to be exiled. Just exile me. Ban me from the city permanently. And So that was a weird sort of a set of weird incentives in Athenian legal practice. Um, so the advantage, of course, for the Athenian jury is that they get someone to admit guilt. So that, and this is important because you don't want someone who's been punished to go around saying, ah, well, yeah, but they were wrong. I was punished unfairly. Right? That's bad. That can stir up unrest. You want them to admit guilt and acknowledge the supremacy and the rightness of the trial, that the guilty verdict was correct. The only thing we're arguing about is the punishment. Okay. So, they find Socrates guilty of impiety and corrupting the youth. And they sentence him to death. Now, this is the part where they were hoping Socrates would admit his guilt and offer a lesser punishment. Socrates, being a colossal pain in the ass, did not do that. Socrates said, you know what I think I deserve? Socrates said, I think I deserve to be treated like an Olympic champion. The Olympics were created in the archaic period of Greece and still existed in the classical period. And various cities sent their champions to compete in the Olympics. And if you won in the Olympics, at least in Athens, if you won, when you came back to the city, they would feast you. They would give you free food in the forum for life. If you were an Olympic champion, you could go down and claim free food in the forum for the rest of your life. That was how much they honored their Olympic champions. That's like if nowadays for the Olympics, which are coming up soon, the 26th, by the way, if the Olympics, if an Olympic champion got a free lifetime Happy Meals at McDonald's, right? If you could go into McDonald's and get Happy Meals for free for the rest of your life if you were an Olympic champion, that's kind of like what they had going in Athens. That an Olympic champion got free food for life. Socrates said, when they said, what do you think you deserve, Socrates? We sentence you to death. What do you think you deserve? Socrates said, I deserve, for the great service I am doing this city by teaching it how to think and asking the hard questions, I deserve free food for life. I deserve to be treated like a Olympic damn champion. Now, holy heck. Obviously, the jury could not accept this. Because if they voted to accept this counteroffer, they basically had to vote that their initial sentence was wrong. They had to say, no, he's not guilty, and that's effectively what they will be voting for. That we've treated him badly, we should treat him like a hero. So they didn't. It was still a pretty close vote. He made a strong case. But they voted to reject his counteroffer and sustain the original sentence of death. Death by poison. So Socrates was given a little time to put his affairs in order, and then he drank poison and died. Socrates died. Why did he die? The casual reading of it is just that he died while being a pain in the ass. He was stubborn, he didn't want to admit he was wrong, and he was willing to die for that. That's the casual reading of it. But in a larger sense, Socrates died for philosophy. He never admitted that he was wrong to teach people that answering the big questions matters. He was willing to die rather than say that, oh, okay, sure, I was corrupting the youth by teaching them how to think. He wanted to know the answers to questions like, what is the meaning of life? What happens when we die? Um, what is the best form of government? Not just because those questions matter, but because thinking deeply about hard questions matters. Because how are we even human if we don't think about things like that? What kind of life is it if the only thing you ever think about is, oh, what am I going to wear today? Or what should I have for lunch? How are you even living a life worth living if you aren't at some point asking yourself, am I a good person? What does that even mean? How should I live? How can I be a good friend? What is there out there? What is the purpose of all this? What kind of life is it that is devoid of those questions? What kind of life is it where you're not allowed to ask them? Where you're put on trial for teaching people to ask them? Socrates refused to admit that he was wrong, to care about the big questions. He was willing to die for that principle. He was willing to die to live an authentic life. I think that's why we're still talking about the trial of Socrates. 2,500 years later, 2,500 years, roughly speaking, after this guy took a stand and said, you know what I deserve for teaching people how to think? I deserve to be treated like a damn champion. 2,500 years after the trial of Socrates, we're still talking about it. Because that's a hell of an example. Would I die? Would I die for that principle? I don't know. The easy answer is no. Right? The easy answer is to say, oof, I don't have those kind of guts. Like, I admire it, but ooh, I don't know. But on the other hand, think about what living a life without those questions would be like. Would you even want it? Would I be able to live a life that did not involve asking the difficult questions? Asking the deep questions? I don't know if I would. I don't think anyone would have to even put me on trial. I think I might just end it all myself. If I had a choice of only ever accepting the answers that someone else gave me to the deep questions about life, if that was my option, I'm not sure I could live that way. I'm not sure I could face myself, if I could face life day after day after day without the privilege, without the responsibility of thinking about what is the point of all this? Who am I as a person? What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be good? If I was literally not allowed to contemplate those things anymore, do I even have a life that is worth living? Maybe I would die for philosophy. I don't know. Maybe all of us would. Or most of us anyway. It's a tough thing, and hopefully no one will ever ask you to. But think about it. Could you ever Could you ever live a life where you were never allowed to look inward and ask questions like, who am I? What do I care about? Where you had to live just according to what the people outside of you said. This is what you should think. This is how you should live. These are the answers to the questions, and don't ever, ever try to look behind them. I don't know. Doesn't seem like much of a life to me. Well, that was our lesson on Greek philosophy. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It ended on such a super upbeat note. How could you not? Um, Next up is the Hellenistic era. I'm going to take a break and maybe change t-shirts to fool you into thinking this is another day. No, we'll see. Take care, be well. You should have enough to answer all the questions that are relevant to this unit, and that's that. Bye bye.